Welcome to Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance in Sacramento. Today we are joined by the Senate Majority Leader Bill Monning. And we have spoken before about the tragic loss of one of your constituents, Daniel McGuire. Tell us about the incident and how the incident inspired you towards certain legislation.
Right. Well, as you say, indeed it was a tragedy that prompted this. An unskilled, unprepared truck driver with a double rig full of aggregate was going down Highway 17, was not able to effectively slow his vehicle and caused a collision involving 10 other vehicles. One was that driven by Daniel McGuire, who perished, and his family brought to us the concern that they learned, and by the driver's own admission, he wasn't able to, he didn't know how to brake his truck on that grade and with that amount of weight. So not every tragedy necessarily leads to a legislative solution.
Okay.
But as we looked into this, we found this was not an isolated one time. We learned that in California, that year of 2014, there were over 10,000 accidents where a commercial truck driver was at fault. And of those, about 2,600 resulted in injury and 62 resulted in fatalities.
And are you explaining to us that the problem is a lack of knowledge and skill?
Lack of effective training. And what we find when you go out on the road and you see big rigs coming at you and passing you, or you're passing them, a lot of them are big trucking companies that have very rigorous training protocols because they're investing in those drivers, because they're entrusting them expensive equipment, expensive cargo, and they don't want liability of accidents. But it's some of the smaller outfits that cut corners, that hire a driver who passes a very minimal test at the DMV, where currently today there's no requirement of showing any behind the wheel training. So my bill quite simply would say if you're going to drive a Class A vehicle, you're going to have to prove that you have 30 hours of behind-the-wheel training.
But let's dig deeper into this issue, because I remember speaking to you about this bill last year. As I understand it, you held the bill because of some federal regulations under the Obama administration.
That's correct.
So tell us what happened there and how your bill goes above and beyond.
So what we learned as we moved this forward last year was that there had been negotiations at the federal level for federal standards for truck safety, basically. And they had stakeholders, truck companies, driver representatives, unions, businesses, etc. And they reached an accommodation that was signed into law by President Obama shortly before he left office. And this was about a 20-year process.
Oh, really?
The parties had agreed to a required behind-the-wheel element, but the final version that was signed by the president did not include the behind-the-wheel training requirement.
What did it include?
It included other protocols of vehicle safety, standards, etc.
Okay.
So what my bill does, Brad, is it would implement those new federal regs that we think are good and do raise the bar for highway safety, truck safety, but we feel they fall short given what propelled us to introduce this bill, the fact of tracing tragedies that we think are preventable to insufficient training. And we think to be fully equipped to operate these heavy multi-ton vehicles, it necessarily has to require some behind-the-wheel training.
Have you received buy-in from the trucking industry?
Well, it's a great question, and we've just introduced the bill, but we have received the support of the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association, which is kind of interesting because these are
the smaller
guys.
Right, and that's really who you need to target.
That's right.
Right.
And so you would think, why are they supporting this when it puts a burden on them? And the answer is really kind of clear, because their drivers are on the road all the time with their investment in their trucks, and they're the ones who are at risk if there's an untrained driver on the road. So it's really a self-protection measure of support. They're saying our members, our drivers are trained, they know what they're doing, but their livelihood is out on those roads, and if there's an inexperienced driver, he not only puts the public at risk, he puts our drivers and our rigs at risk.
So are you looking to speak with, is it called the California Trucking Association?
Yes, and they did support my earlier version bill. We haven't had that conversation yet. There's often some nuances that people are concerned about. Some of the bigger companies do their own training, and so the question is, would that training count towards, would that result in a certificate that would satisfy the requirements of our bill? So we're open to those conversations.
You'll work through that.
Because our standard, what we're looking for is well-trained truck drivers. So if a company and association can show us these are our protocols, we're doing more than 30 hours behind the wheel, then we just need a way to verify that and provide that proof to the Department of Motor Vehicles.
I want to speak with you about health care. I believe you had been chair of Senate Health.
Assembly Health, I was chair.
Okay, Assembly Health, when you were in the Assembly.
And I sit on Senate Health.
In California, as a result of the Affordable Care Act, we have seen our uninsured rate drop dramatically from about 17% to about 8%. I think about 5 million Californians now have insurance that didn't. I think maybe, what is it, 1.5-ish because of Cover California, 3.5-ish because of the expansion.
Right.
We know in Washington there's agitation to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Where does California fall in the midst of all this uncertainty?
Right. Well, we're very concerned because, as you point out, we think the ACA has been tremendously successful in California and indeed nationally. Not without problems or need for adjustments, but the fact of the matter is more people are getting access to primary care, which includes preventive care, access to vaccines, to drug treatment programs, to alcohol treatment programs, women getting access to prenatal care, all of which reduces the health care bill down the road when we can get people covered and invest in the front end. So the danger of a repeal without a replacement is how many people are going to be left high and dry, and that we end this successful experiment in a horrific way for families who depend on it.
So what can California do? I mean, we do have a majority leader in the U.S. House of Representatives from California, from Bakersfield. I mean, his rhetoric suggests he wants to see Obamacare repealed.
Well, I think it's where the voice, particularly in Republican districts, and in my view, this shouldn't be a partisan issue, but it has been made a very partisan issue. But many Republicans are benefiting from the ACA, many working families, many elders. I mean, the list goes on and on. I think the immediate reassurance for Californians, and people need to hear this, that if you've signed up on Covered California before the end of January, you've got a year contract. Nothing's going to change for you during the course of that. And we even hear from the new president that this is going to take some time, even though they promised it would be the first thing they did, would repeal.
But they have signed executive orders which are directing the federal government to avoid enforcement of the Affordable Care Act. So could one argue that's an effective repeal?
It's chipping at it because they've taken some information off federal websites. But interestingly, some of the red states that opted in for the Medicaid payments, that saves those states money, and it provides health care coverage money that's not being paid by state taxpayers. I mean, we all pay when it's federal tax. The question is, are we going to get our tax back to support our community?
He is Bill Monning, Senate Majority Leader in California. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's Local Edition.